The car stopped in front of the hospital, and the door slid open quickly as a woman stepped out, her heels striking the floor with measured steps that spoke of discipline and purpose. She moved with calm confidence, her posture upright, her eyes sharp, yet carrying a warmth that told of strength shaped by struggle. She was here for one reason only, to see her loved one, who had been admitted into the VIP section of the hospital. The air around her seemed to shift as people turned to look, some out of curiosity, others with quiet recognition of someone who did not just blend into the background. She carried herself not with arrogance, but with the quiet assurance of someone who had faced storms and had learned not to bow to them. As she walked through the hospital lobby, she noticed the way conversation seemed to lower for a moment, how nurses and staff glanced at her and then quickly looked away as though afraid to hold her gaze. Her steps echoed down the hallway, steady and unhurried, but her heart raced with concern. The one she loved lay in a room waiting, and every second she lost felt heavier than the last. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and kept her pace even, not allowing her urgency to spill out into panic. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and she entered, pressing the button that would take her directly to the floor where the VIP suites were located. Inside, she caught her reflection in the mirror-like surface of the doors, her expression calm, her features set with quiet determination, yet, beneath it all, a flicker of worry glowed in her eyes. When the elevator reached its floor, she stepped out and turned toward the VIP corridor, the place where privacy and special care were meant to be offered. Her presence filled the hallway as she approached, her confidence not forced, but natural, the type that came from years of perseverance and dignity. Though she walked alone, there was an undeniable aura of strength surrounding her, as if invisible walls of resilience guarded her every step. She was not loud, nor did she need to announce who she was. Her silence spoke louder than words. In her mind, thoughts of her loved one kept pressing forward. Were they comfortable? Were they in pain? Had the doctors done everything they could? Each unanswered question tightened her chest, but she did not let her face show it. Instead, she held her head high and advanced toward the double doors that led into the exclusive section of the hospital. The corridor was unusually quiet, the air heavier, almost as though it was holding its breath with her. She could already picture the moment of walking into that room, of sitting beside her loved one and offering the comfort they would need. But even as she drew closer to the doors, there was a faint chill in the air, a sense that something unexpected awaited her. Her hand reached out toward the handle, and though her steps remained steady, her heart whispered that her journey through these halls was about to shift in a way she could not yet see. She took a breath, her presence quiet but unshaken, and pushed forward with the strength of someone who had never been easily turned away. She reached the tall glass doors of the VIP section, her steps measured, but filled with the urgency of someone whose heart was already inside that room with her loved one, waiting. But before she could cross the threshold, a figure in a pressed uniform stepped forward, blocking her path with a hand raised in a subtle but firm gesture. The staff member looked her up and down, not with curiosity, but with an assumption that weighed heavier than words. She paused, steadying her breath, then spoke with calm clarity, explaining who she was and why she was there, her tone polite and respectful, not demanding. She expected the explanation to be enough, for reason to outweigh appearances. But the staff member shook his head, his eyes hardening as though her words had carried no weight at all. "This area is for VIP guests only," he said, his voice clipped, final, as if her presence in front of those doors was already a mistake. For a moment she stood still, her mind absorbing the sting behind those words. She tried again, her voice still steady, though softer now, explaining that her loved one had been admitted, that she was family, that she belonged by their side. But again, she was denied, the man's tone even sharper this time, repeating that she could not enter, that this space was not for her. The words cut more deeply than if he had shouted them. For it was not noise, but dismissal, not anger, but quiet exclusion that made her chest ache. Around them, the corridor seemed colder, the silence pressing closer, as though the walls themselves had heard the rejection. She could feel the humiliation rise, not in loud protest, but in the quiet heat that touched her cheeks. The way her dignity had been weighed and dismissed without a chance to prove its worth. She held her posture, her shoulders unbowed, though inside she felt the sharp contrast between her calm presence and the way she was being treated. The staff member's eyes slid past her as if she were invisible, as if her words and her purpose carried no meaning in this place. She did not argue, not yet, for her strength was not in raised voices, but in the quiet power of patience. Still, the sting of rejection lingered, sharper than hunger, sharper than exhaustion, for it was a reminder of how quickly one could be judged, not by truth, but by assumption. She stepped back a half pace, her hand tightening around the strap of her bag, her breath slow, controlled. The humiliation was silent, but it pressed against her chest like a weight, unseen yet impossible to ignore. In that moment, the hall felt longer, the doors heavier, and the distance between her and her loved one far greater than it truly was. She did not look down, nor did she allow her eyes to show defeat. Instead, she stood still, her silence stronger than words, though her heart carried the sting of being told she did not belong in a place where she had every right to stand. She took a step back from the guarded doorway, the polished floor beneath her shoes suddenly feeling colder than before, as though even the building itself had decided to remind her that she did not belong. Her heart wanted to speak, wanted to shout, but her pride kept her lips pressed tight. She lifted her chin, refusing to let her hurt be read too easily, yet inside, the wound was already growing deeper than words could measure. The rejection was sharp, yes, but sharper still was the judgment that came without thought, without care, in a place where compassion should have been the first response. Hospitals were meant to heal, to comfort, to protect, but instead, she found herself standing on the wrong side of a line drawn by someone who had not even tried to see her humanity. Around her, the air changed. Conversations that had been flowing a moment ago thinned into whispers, some curious, some amused, some pitying. She could feel eyes on her, not kind eyes, but questioning ones, asking silently why she was there, why she had dared to walk where others thought she did not belong. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed it down, forcing her breathing to stay even, steady. She would not let strangers see her break. Still, the sting burned hotter, because it was not just about her being turned away from a room, it was about being misjudged in the one place where judgment should have no home. She thought of the loved one she had come for, waiting, perhaps hoping for her presence, not knowing that the very people meant to care for them were barring her from being by their side. That thought twisted inside her, a silent ache that hurt more than the guard's words. Every second spent outside those doors felt like betrayal, not of herself, but of the person she loved. She stood there, her back straight, her hands clasped together, a silent storm beneath her calm appearance. Whispers rippled again. A passing couple glanced her way, then quickly looked off, as if the moment was too uncomfortable to witness. To them it was just a scene, a woman denied entry, but to her it was a cut to her dignity, one that would not fade quickly. The wound was not on her skin, but inside her spirit, invisible to the eye, yet impossible to ignore. She wanted to scream at the unfairness, to call out the smallness of hearts that could not recognize her right. But she knew her power lay elsewhere, in restraint, in the strength to endure without crumbling. So she stood, her silence louder than the whispers, her pain sharper than the coldness of the denial. What they did not see was the strength it took for her not to lower her head, not to walk away, not to allow the humiliation to drive her into the shadows. She remained still, not broken, only waiting, carrying within her the wound of being misjudged in a place that should have been ruled by compassion. She stood there in the corridor, her hands steady at her side, though inside her chest a storm brewed that few could ever imagine. 3 long minutes passed, each second stretching into its own eternity, as if time itself had slowed down to let the weight of the moment press deeper upon her. She did not move, did not argue, did not demand her right as most would have done, and this silence confused those who watched. To some, she looked defeated, but her stillness was not weakness, was the pause before something greater, the gathering of power that would not be wasted in careless words. Her eyes, sharp and steady, swept over the scene in front of her. She noticed the staff member's tightened jaw, the stiff arrogance in his voice that had carried the denial as if it were a duty rather than a choice. She saw how his posture shifted slightly, not from strength, but from the comfort of believing his actions would be supported by the institution he worked for. Then her gaze moved to those around Hertha, patients, the visitors, the nurses passing by, each carrying a different expression. Some avoided her eyes altogether, uncomfortable with what they had seen. Others watched with unease, guilt tugging at their silence, wishing perhaps that someone would step forward, but unwilling to bear the risk themselves. And then there were the few who smirked faintly, enjoying the humiliation that was not their own, as though witnessing another's pain gave them a small measure of superiority. She caught all of it, each detail like a brushstroke, painting the larger picture of injustice. Yet, it was not the arrogance that held her attention the longest, nor the whispers, circling her like faint echoes. It was the quiet heaviness that filled the air itself, an invisible weight pressing down on everyone present. It was the unspoken truth that what had been done was wrong, that compassion had been replaced by assumption, and that no one had the courage to name it aloud. She breathed slowly, each inhale giving her strength, each exhale washing away the sting of emotion that threatened to betray her calm. The 3 minutes were not wasted. They were her shield, her chance to turn humiliation into clarity. She felt her anger transform into something sharper, steadier, resolve that could not be shaken. And though no one else could see it yet, she knew the balance of power in that hallway was already beginning to shift. By standing silent, she had given everyone else time to feel the discomfort of the injustice, time for the weight of their own silence to sink in. Every second built suspense in the air, drawing the eyes of those who would later remember this moment with unease. She had not raised her voice, yet the silence she carried was louder than any protest, for it spoke of control, of patience, of a strength that did not need to beg for recognition. In those 3 minutes, she became more than a woman denied entry. She became a presence impossible to dismiss. Her calm composure, a quiet warning that the story unfolding here was not yet finished. What the staff member believed to be the end of her attempt was, in truth, only the beginning. The silence in the corridor had grown so thick it seemed no one dared breathe, and in that silence, she moved. Her steps were slow but steady, each one deliberate, carrying with it a quiet authority that none could deny. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and measured, but the weight of her words cut through the heavy air like a blade. She explained, not loudly, not angrily, but with a clarity that shook the walls around her, that she was not just a visitor, not simply a woman coming to see someone she loved. She was, in fact, the owner of the very hospital where she now stood denied entry. At first, there was disbelief, a flicker of doubt, crossing the faces of the staff who had judged her so quickly. Their confidence, once so firm, began to crumble as recognition set in. Whispers broke out among those watching, a ripple of shock spreading faster than the words themselves. The staff member who had stopped her shifted uneasily, his once straight posture now bent with shame, his eyes refusing to meet hers. The arrogance that had colored his tone moments ago vanished completely, replaced by a trembling awareness that he had crossed a line far greater than he could have imagined. Around the room, people stared with wide eyes, stunned that the woman they had assumed to be out of place was the very foundation upon which their work stood. Nurses froze mid-step, patients leaned forward in disbelief, and visitors who had whispered before now fell into a guilty silence. Her revelation did not come with rage or vengeance. It came with the quiet strength of truth, undeniable and firm. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted completely. The humiliation she had been forced to endure turned back upon those who had created it, and they felt the sting of their own assumptions cut deeper than any words she could have spoken in anger. She did not need to raise her voice, for her presence and her truth spoke louder than any outburst ever could. The staff who had treated her as if she did not belong now found themselves exposed under the weight of their own mistake, their confidence draining away with every second they stood before her. The corridor, once filled with arrogance and whispers, now belonged to her completely. She stood not just as the owner of the hospital, but as a living reminder that respect should never be based on appearances. And though she had revealed her power, the way she carried herself made it clear that it was never about power alone. It was about dignity, justice, and the kind of respect that should have been hers from the very beginning. Those who witnessed the moment would never forget it, for it was not just the revelation of who she was, but the revelation of what they had failed to be. The air in the hallway was still heavy with shock, every eye fixed on her as if waiting for what would come next. And when she spoke again, her voice carried no anger, but a steady calm that commanded attention. She reminded them gently but firmly that hospitals were never built on wealth or walls, but on the promise of care, dignity, and respect for every human being who walked through their doors. Her words struck deeper than any raised tone could have, because they were not spoken to wound, but to remind, to hold up a mirror to those who had forgotten the true purpose of their work. The staff who had denied her stood frozen, their arrogance stripped away, leaving only unease and shame in its place. She looked at them one by one, her eyes steady, not cruel, but unwavering. And in that silence, everyone knew a decision was coming. She had the power to forgive, to let the moment pass. But she also had the responsibility to protect the spirit of the place she had built. And she would not allow arrogance and prejudice to poison its heart. After a pause that stretched like a held breath, she spoke the words that would change everything. Those who had chosen judgment over compassion, those who had placed arrogance above kindness, could not remain under her roof. Her decision was not shouted, not thrown like a punishment, but laid down with quiet certainty, and it carried the weight of finality. Gasps rippled through the hallway, some out of fear, some out of relief, for in that moment justice had found its place. The staff who had turned her away felt the ground shift beneath them, realizing too late that the job they had taken for granted had been lost in the space of a few careless words. Others in the corridor, who had remained silent witnesses, now felt a strange mix of shame and hope, for though they had not spoken up, they had seen a truth revealed before their eyes, that dignity and kindness mattered more than titles, uniforms, or rules. She did not look back at those who now lowered their heads, but she knew her choice would echo through every corner of the hospital. Her decision was not only about those who would leave, but about those who remained. A lesson carved into the very walls. Respect is not optional, and compassion is not a courtesy, it is the foundation of everything. As her words settled over the silent crowd, there was no doubt left, no hesitation. She had made her choice, and in doing so, she had changed the course of the place forever. The moment her decision was spoken, it felt as though the very air shifted, as if the walls themselves understood the weight of what had just taken place. The staff members who had denied her stood frozen, their faces pale, their earlier confidence drained away completely. Seconds ago, they had believed they held power, that they could decide who was worthy and who was not, but now they realized how quickly arrogance could turn into downfall. One by one, they were dismissed, their dismissal as calm and steady as her voice, but final all the same. No shouting, no anger, no cruel words, only the firm truth that there was no place in this hospital for those who placed pride above compassion, As they walked away, some with lowered heads and trembling hands, the hallway fell into a silence so heavy it pressed down on everyone present. The whispers that had once filled the space vanished. No one dared speak, for the lesson unfolding was far too sharp and clear to interrupt. Among the crowd, emotions shifted like ripples on water. Some felt shame burn in their chests, realizing they too had stood by in silence when the woman was denied her dignity. Others felt an unexpected relief, as if justice had finally been given a voice that could not be silenced. Nurses exchanged quiet glances, visitors clutched their bags a little tighter, and patients peered out from their rooms, knowing instinctively they had witnessed something they would not soon forget. For the woman, it was not about victory but about truth, about drawing a line that had been crossed too many times before. She had shown them that true authority did not need to shout, it only needed to stand firm in what was right. The dismissed staff left the building carrying more than the loss of a job. They carried the weight of their choices, the memory of a moment when judgment blinded them, and the knowledge that their arrogance had cost them everything. Those who remained, however, felt a new sense of responsibility settle on their shoulders. They understood now that every action, every word, every choice mattered, not just to the patients they served, but to the spirit of the hospital itself. The silence lingered, deep and unbroken, not out of fear, but out of respect, as if all who stood there knew they had been given a lesson they would remember for the rest of their lives. The silence of that day did not stay within the hospital walls. It traveled, carried in whispers, and retold in conversations, until it became a story far greater than the moment itself. People spoke of the black woman who had been denied entry to a place where she not only belonged, but a place she owned, and how she had turned humiliation into a lesson no one could ignore. The tale spread through the staff, who told their families about the quiet strength they had witnessed, and it moved into the community, where neighbors repeated it with awe, each detail adding weight to the truth behind it. Soon, it was no longer just about a woman correcting a mistake. It was about dignity, about the right of every human being to be treated with respect, no matter who they were. In coffee shops, in offices, and even in schools, people shared what had happened, using her calm but firm action as an example of how power could be used, not to crush, but to lift, not to humiliate, but to restore balance. Many who heard the story found themselves pausing to think about their own choices, remembering times they had judged too quickly or failed to stand up when someone else was treated unfairly. The weight of her action grew heavier in meaning, not because she raised her voice, but because she showed how silence, when paired with truth and courage, could shake an entire building. The hospital itself changed. Policies were rewritten, training sessions were held, and leaders reminded their staff that care and compassion were not optional. They were the very foundation of their duty. Years later, the story was still retold, not as gossip but as a parable of strength, teaching that power, if guided by kindness, could change lives forever. Patients spoke of how they felt safer knowing that the owner of the hospital valued people above status. Staff members reminded new employees of that day, as if it were a sacred rule carved into the walls. Treat every person with dignity. And for those who carried the memory in their hearts, it was not just about one woman or one hospital, it was about the lesson that respect cannot be taken away by ignorance, and compassion, when chosen over pride, has the power to transform everything it touches.